Okay, everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Our webinar today includes 3 Agile and DevOps best practices for success in the Atlassian Cloud. And today's webinar is brought to you by ISOS Technology and AppFire. They are platinum solution providers on the Atlassian marketplace, and my company, StarCIO. I'd like to introduce today our 2 guest panelists. First is Steve Kling. Steve is the head of product engineering at AppFire. He has over 26 years of experience in IT and software development, 8 years as an administrator, consultant, and app designer in the Atlassian ecosystem. And today he is the head of engineering of AppFire, the top-selling platinum app vendor in the Atlassian marketplace. Hello, Steve. You're on mute, Steve. Make sure you turn yourself on mute. Say hi to everyone, please.
Hey, Isaac. Thanks for having me.
There you go. Thanks for being here. And Rodney West. Rodney, of course, is the senior Atlassian consultant at ISOS Technology. He brings social engineering and technical expertise to all ISOS clients. He's an architect and a functional consultant with over 20 years experience delivering enterprise solutions.
Hi, everybody. Great that you could join us today.
Great. And I'm Isaac Sokolic again. I'm the president of StarCIO. I'm the author of the book, Driving Digital. I'm really happy to be here. For those of you who have joined other ISOS webinars, it's great to have you back. And today we're really going to go through some special topics around best practices in Agile and DevOps. Before I get started, I do have some notes about the webinar. We are recording this webinar. It will be available on demand afterwards. So if you miss parts of it, you will be able to get a link to go see it. There will be questions that we can answer through the presentation, but also at the end. This will be a dialogue. So we'll be looking for your questions. And if there's something pertinent to what we're discussing, I'll bring it up with our panelists. Otherwise, we have plenty of time at the end to take all of your questions. And since we are talking about today about best practices, I hope you will take advantage of that. Now, I want to set the stage for this, why we wanted to put this webinar together. And I want you to think about this as a now what scenario. And I could think of 3 different situations where you'll be sitting today and thinking about how do you start implementing some more best practices. Some of you might have just moved from an on-prem Atlassian setup into the cloud. You now have access to a whole number of new apps from the marketplace, new capabilities that the cloud environment takes on. And so you might be thinking to yourself, now what should I do next with this? Or maybe some of you are on the development side, have been using Jira software for a long period of time and recognize the need to start putting together more capabilities around the operations side, things like request and incident management and change management. And we'll be covering a lot around that as well. And then third, many of you have multiple teams in your environment that you work with, and you might be looking at how to use Jira software and Jira Service Manager and the other Atlassian tools to create some standards and best practices. I do have a team here of real experts, and so I want to introduce them to you in a way of how they've been using Jira and Atlassian tools over the last few years and into their career, so that you can really use this time to ask your questions. So, Steve, let's start with you. You have some experience even before AppFire when you were at HomeAway using the Atlassian tools. Can you describe which tools you used, how they were used, what problems they were solving for you there?
Well, sure. In fact, my story probably is very relevant, and a lot of people on this call will probably relate to it. I started off at that organization as sort of a rank and file member of the engineering team. I fell into an underutilized Jira and Confluence instance there. I think I recognized the potential that was not being quite realized with that, and I kind of took it on and began adminning that. That turned into kind of a full-time job. We started wiring up additional, some of the original integrations there with that Bamboo. Did a lot of work on the Confluence side of things as well. and then even started building custom applications there and custom integrations with things like status page. This was prior to that being purchased by Atlassian. And interestingly enough, it was the work that I'd done with the Bob Swift line of AppFire products that got me introduced, that I sought them out at Atlas Camp and got me introduced to the AppFire family at that time, which ultimately brought me here a few years later down the line. In between there, I had worked for another organization developing and designing apps for the ecosystem. So I have a lot of experience there. And then here with AppFire, joined to help them build out their cloud offerings.
Thanks, Steven. What I really like about your story is I think it's a similar journey that other companies go through, where you start with one use case and one set of problems. Maybe you just need a place to store your backlog. Then all of a sudden you're trying to figure out where to create documentation and views for other people in the organization. You go to Confluence, and then you get into more on the operations side of things with things like status page and some of the other tools there. So a lot of expertise around the tools. And Rodney, your experience, you're working with a lot of clients, you're doing a lot of cloud migrations and automations. What are some of the things you've been recently working on?
So, with basically, the maturing of Atlassian's cloud over the last year, we've seen a lot of people that are either merging cloud instances. So you have the, cloud to cloud migrations where you're doing these combinations, or we're seeing, the case that actually we're really heavy on right now are organizations moving from either server or data center up. And we're actually seeing a lot more enterprises start to make that move. Initially it was like smaller organizations, sub 200 people moving up to cloud. But now we're seeing, in the thousands move up with, the hundreds of thousands to the million plus issues moving up to cloud. And that's what we're seeing like more and more of. And that consumes a lot more of my time, is actually working on the strategies, both to get organizations moved, and then post move, how do we help those organizations get the most out of the tooling?
Thanks, Rodney. I mean, super for that. And for those of you who don't know, Rodney and I have done at least one, I'm thinking even two webinars around the migration to Atlassian Cloud. If any of you are interested in seeing that and can't find that webinar, just give a shout out in the chat window, and somebody from the ISOS team will give you the URL for that other webinar that's available on demand. As for myself, I've been doing Agile and DevOps and ITSM for almost 2 decades. I work a lot with CIOs and IT leaders around implementing Agile and about implementing really the collaboration between development and operations teams. And for those of you who don't know, StarCIO, my company, runs on Jira. It runs all of our weekly sprints, and I'll be sharing some information about how we use Jira in this webinar. But let's get into our first best practice. And again, I want to invite all of you to ask your questions as we're going through. We're going to start with automation in general. Automation is a really hot topic. For those of you who keep up to date with the latest research, Harvey, Nash, and KPMG published a study of last year that 71% of IT leaders are expanding automation as part of their service delivery. And I'm just interested, Rodney, what problems are IT leaders solving with automation on Atlassian's tools?
So the interesting thing is, automation really answers that Jira doesn't do that roadblock that we hear a lot of times, where, people go, I have the issue and I'm going through the workflow. It's not doing what I want it to do. It just goes status to status to status. And it doesn't seem like there's too much complexity in there. And really, then you go, well, wait a second. Have you looked at automation? Like one of the really common cases, we'll see inside of it, and this is going to be more on the JSM side, is a ticket comes in and it is a low priority versus a high priority, and the workflow requires approvals. Well, when it's going through, do you need somebody to decide this needs an approval or doesn't need approval? No, automate that. If it doesn't need the approval, go directly from status 1 to status 2. If it needs the approval, you stay in that status 1 until it gets the approval based on the priority. So that's, that's one of the routing things we see is actually a very common pattern. There's another pattern that we see, and this one is also the really super common, is where you have requests come into the service desk. But the teams who are best suited to work on those have their own projects where they work on a sprint schedule. They got Scrum boards, they got Kanban boards. So the person doing the triage or the agent inside of the service desk, they can go, okay, this is this team's responsibility. But at that point, they can't work on it. They can't prioritize it. So you move it to a certain point in the workflow. Automation actually creates a ticket or multiple tickets in other projects like HR offboarding, right? You need to bring back there's hardware you need to bring back in. There's passwords you need to remove. There's offboarding interviews. That puts that inside of the actual projects for like an HR team or an IT team or finance or legal, basically whoever needs to be involved. And the agent actually, they don't have to create all those tickets. They don't care. They just go, okay, this is in here. It goes to the status, and there are automation rules that sit behind it that do that. So it makes it to where, your requests that come in are more robust in what they can do on the back end.
Thanks, Rodney. So I'm hearing routing as an example, using logic to move a workflow from one stage to another, very common types of things, groups that one want to do. Steve, AppFire, you have more than one app that allows for automation. Can you give us a little sense, what do these tools do? Which one should people be looking at for different use cases?
Well, sure. And, automation is really a growth area that we have focused very heavily on. We've made some acquisitions this past year of very well-known automation products. Our intent is to, own that space and provide, with the different product offerings that we have, very specific and focused areas, apps for different needs within the automation space. So we have, for instance, JMWE, which is Jira Miscellaneous Workflow Extensions, JSU, which is formerly known as the Java Suite or Jira Suite Utilities, but now is JSU Automated Automation Suite. And then we also have Power Scripts. And then, of course, we have had for a long time the Bob Swift line of the ACLI, the CLI products, the Jira CLI and the Confluence CLI for cloud. And each one of those, is sort of intended to target a sort of specific set of use cases. I personally like JMWE for its out of the box list of post functions, conditions, validators, things like that, and make wiring up a lot of those really simple use cases, some of which Rodney touched on, very simple and easy. JSU, I love the power of JSU, and JMWE has some of this capability as well. But one of my favorite stories actually is before I ever joined AppFire, putting together a specific automation for a customer that was wanting to get a Bitbucket hook and send that Bitbucket payload back to Jira. Now, Jira has some built-in extensions already to be able to do some basic workflow, transitions and things like that. But this was a specific use case where they needed a webhook back presented in Jira Cloud, that could take the payload and then scrape that for a regex base to look at the keys, the specific issue key, and perform some automations on that. And without JSU, we would have had to have created a cloud app, which before Forge came along, you know that we would have had to stand up some kind of either serverless or some kind of SaaS-based instance to run that cloud app on, and it prevented us from having to do that. We've recently acquired Power Scripts, which if you're comfortable with scripting, provides yet another level of capabilities there. And of course the CLI capabilities, everyone who's worked with the REST endpoints and tried to do the REST integrations, for instance, with their CI/CD tools, is aware that even developers sometimes have difficulty with the authentication and stuff like that. You really have to know what you're doing. You have a good solid knowledge of HTTP and a good tool set there to do those REST integrations. CLI does all that for you, makes those kinds of integrations really simple. Load that thing into your pipeline image or load that thing into your build agent, and you could do a lot of additional automation that you would otherwise need a really highly technical individual to do for you. So those are the ones that I would highlight.
So Steve, I'm hearing things like GMWE, a lot of out-of-the-box type of integrations. I'm hearing JSU is going to let me do a little bit more in terms of some flexibilities. And then I'm hearing all the way up to things like CLI when I'm integrating with authentication, when I'm maybe doing some data mapping where I need a lot of fine-grained control. I have a way of doing that. So am I sort of bucketing these in the right ways?
Yeah, pretty much. Again, the two use cases that really jump out to me and that I've used personally for CLI, for example, have been those cases where we build some bash scripts, some scripts integrated directly into the build agents and also into those plans, but also for lots of bulk related stuff, which is a little outside of the automation, here, but it's absolutely huge in that area as well. So there's lots of use. Now, I will say that for JMWE and JSU, there's a lot of power there. And what I recommend is, of course, everything has a free 30-day trial. Check them both out and see which one really fits your use case the best in that case, and also which one seems more intuitive to you.
Yeah, I like
I think from,
go ahead, Ronnie.
From the perspective of what I see, like in all the cloud migration stuff that I do, and just working with clients for years, even doing the server to data center or whatever, is I haven't come across any mature organizations that don't have one of those two add-ons installed in their workflows to fill gaps from the native functionality. And a lot of them have both of them, and both of them actually in there. So.
Thanks, Roddy. Yeah, so I'm going to share a few use cases that I've seen quite a bit of, particularly organizations that are connecting ITSM service management with their agile workflows. Being able to take an incident ticket that is around an application, generate a defect on a team's backlog, and keep the incident record and the defect in sync, so that when there's an update, both parties can leverage the information on that update. So that's one common use case. I also see a lot of user experience areas, places where people want to collect a little bit more data, start adding fields into their issue screens or into their change screens, for example, and find ways to do shorthand notations. So you can enter a string of information and it pre-populates things like due dates and other areas of the form that you're putting up. And then finally, one of the more interesting ones we covered, site reliability engineering at a previous webinar. One of the more interesting things I've seen is actually creating alerts when error budgets are at risk, and you can measure those things, you can report on those things, and then being able to write some automations around them. So a few different places where I see automations, things that improve the user experience, moving data from one area to another, simplifying workflows. I mean, Steve had a few examples of that, as well as Rodney around automating pieces of the workflow. And those are things to look for when you see those types of barriers where you can either improve a user experience or do something faster. There's probably a place to do automation, and you have a couple of options there, right? You can you can use the free trials from AppFire to try things out. You can also work with ISOs in terms of getting some help in terms of implementing some of your more advanced automations. One of the areas of automation that most organizations eventually get into is into their DevOps pipelines, their CICD and change orchestration areas. And I love this use case because anybody who's doing software development is at a point today where they know they want to automate more steps in the integration and deployment processes. So let's go deeper a little bit into this. There are multiple tools being used in organizations across the entire SDLC testing and deployment. There's Jira, there's CICD for the pipelines, there's version control, there's testing tools, and then of course there's our cloud environments, your AWS, your Azure environments. So Steve, what are organizations implementing beyond just the pipeline when we say, let's make sure CI/CD is happening across the ecosystem?
Well, we've touched on them, I think, a little bit earlier, and that is one is just those, there's lots of triggering and automation that can happen. Roddy sort of alluded to it as well and mentioned that, preventing, for instance, your developers from having to remember to go back after a pull request is reviewed in GitHub or Bitbucket, to have to go back and change and update and transition the status of that. That's a really obvious one that comes in there. The one thing I'll say is that I've been at organizations that we call it sort of the Atlassian stack or the Atlassian Pure, that go from publishing in Confluence to using Jira, using Bitbucket, and of course Bamboo for CI/CD. And there's some value there with those integrations that they just kind of come pre-installed and pre-hooked up. But with a third-party ecosystem, I will say this: what we end up seeing is that in every case, is Jira just becomes the hub for all of that information, for that traceability that you want to see all the way through design and into development and implementation and deployment. But not everybody falls in on the same stack. In fact, usually what you have this heterogeneous, or what do we call best in class stack, like you said, using Azure, using CircleCI, or a lot of people using Jenkins for their CID, for example, and Jenkins pipelines. And with the third-party marketplace that's out there, that ecosystem provides real easy-to-use integrations now with all of those products. So being able to transition those issues, being able to present webhooks, as I mentioned before, so that you can gather information from pull requests and update tickets or transition statuses, really provides what I think is the key value of any of these stacks together. And that is traceability, starting with your Jira issue, being able to have on those right-hand side panels, the builds, the commits, the pull requests, all of that information, and have that be that sort of each issue be the dashboard for whatever that requirement was.
Thanks for that, Steve. Rodney, maybe talk to us a little bit about Atlassian's approach here. Lots of different tools. What do you know about their approach? Can you talk about that? And there's actually a question here in the panel that I want to follow up with you on that one after you talk about the Atlassian approach.
Yeah, and the Atlassian approach really feeds into what Steve is saying here. So, one of the things they talked about at Team 21 this year was basically it was the open DevOps software project type. And basically, that's kind of your starting point. Traditionally, right, what we've done inside of Jira is we go in, we've got the developer panel, and then you've got the release hub, which the interesting thing with the release hub is a lot of times when I mention that to clients, some of them are using it, but more of them are like, wait, the what now? Like they don't even realize that you can actually go in and see kind of that information at a higher level. And so what Atlassian's done with kind of the open DevOps concept is they have that information more front and center for the whole team, right? So it's kind of there's tabs and panels on the side where if you're somebody that's interested in reporting, you can go into your special reporting, but you're only interested in code. Okay, you can pop over into code easily, and this is without even having to navigate into the specific issues. This will actually show you stuff also higher at the project level, and it bubbles things up, right? Because really, when you're working on things, right, you work on an issue that's backed by a ticket, and if you're doing things properly, right, your Jira branching and your commit names and and your deploys, they have a reference to the issue. But you really need to see kind of more at the project level, and that's what the open DevOps thing is doing. Additionally, to more into Steve's point there about people using different tools, right? Yeah, you've got Bitbucket and you've got Bamboo, but if you want to use a CircleCI and you want to use GitHub, basically Atlassian's gone, you know what? Let's make sure people are able to use best in breed, not this is what we're going to give you and this is what we're going to say prescriptive. This works with our tools and you're on your own otherwise. So it's kind of being able to set up those structures a lot better now for teams to have visibility and traceability to see everything that's going on, and to use Jira as that formal hub. You go into your project, you're able to get everywhere you need and get all of the information, whether you're at the PM level, whether you're a developer, wherever you fit on the stack of somebody that's interested in this project. You should have levels of visibility in there while not limiting the project team and having the project team have to go, well, we're using this tool, so you're going to have to go over to this URL to get to this information and, right, and go X, Y, Z and through 20 hoops. Jira is that central point. That's where they're going with open DevOps, is use the best of breed tools that you want to use and have Jira be the central location for you to actually have that traceability and that history of what's going on.
Perfect, Rodney, and that's really a good segue to this question. You heard earlier today on the webinar, Steve talk about his journey into using more of the Atlassian tools, and so those tools are there, and then at the same time, Atlassian has a very open environment. So the question's around a tool called Manage Engine, and I don't know if I know that tool, but if you don't, I would say maybe answer it also generically, where you might have some Atlassian tools, maybe you have others that you're using, commercial tools. How do you go about comparing one tool to another? What are some of the things you'd like to say about using the Atlassian tools under one umbrella versus picking different tools and trying to get them integrated under a hub environment like you described? Do you know Manage Engine? I don't.
It's come up in a couple of engagements, but I really haven't used it that much, Steve.
No, I'm not
That's
familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's come up as a question. So well, one of the things you can do with the tooling, this is right. So there are multiple integrations. Like, and I'm going to go back to this Open DevOps thing because those are ones that plug in automatically. But if you go to the marketplace, there's things with additional integrations that you can use, into Jira to bubble up that information. If you can't find that, the other, of course, the other side of that is, is you can actually hook in via webhooks to the functionality on the Jira side and pass information back and forth, kind of like what Steve was saying with some of the repository information that you want to do going back and forth. But then there's some additional stuff, like additional tooling out there, like that will let you hook these other tools in. But I would say, whenever you're going through, really what you want to look for is am I going to be able to see the information that I need inside of these tools? What is the level of friction that's going to exist for my developers? First off, you don't want there to be a lot of friction with your developers. Coming from somebody who is a developer and architect for a long time, if I'm told I've got to go to 10 different places to update this and do all this work, you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to do that. And your commits are going to, basically your commit messages may not be as good. It's going to be hard to figure out what's going on. There's going to be a lack of visibility. And, that's really the enemy of really what you're trying to accomplish. So you want to see how much friction is actually removed by the tooling. You want to make sure that you're able to get reporting out of the tools too, because the developers are able to do their work. You're able to put everything in. Your IT teams are able to do their work. Okay, that's great. But when your CTO or your CIO comes in and goes, okay, so where are we? And you go, we've got a bunch of commits. You know what? Their answer, they're not going to like that one you just gave them. And now you're gonna be spending the next week of late nights pulling together all that information. So those are kind of three of the things that I really look at whenever I'm comparing tools. And like I said, there's more integrations being added into Jira around this open DevOps, this DevOps philosophy. And so I would say look at that too and see if you're using a specific tool and you want to make sure it works in with Jira. If they don't have an integration right now, see where that is on the roadmap. Reach out to that tool vendor and reach out to the Atlassian community too, because somebody may know this is actually the integration you want to use here, or there's integration on the horizon.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, something that Rodney said that really stuck out to me, and that is, how do you enforce discipline, right, with your developers? And the best way to do that is to have them see the intrinsic value of doing whatever that discipline is. And issue-based branching in Jira, for example, or using issue keys in your commit messages, they see the value immediately in that, through that traceability with that, when they're doing PR, pull request reviews and things like that. That alone has them automatically begin picking up those practices that you want to see anyway. And it's a self-reinforcing discipline. That's what I like about it.
Steve, that's great. And I'll just hopefully end the question for you around this is that, just like Steve described earlier, there are organizations I walk into and, there's Jira working with the development group, and maybe there was an acquisition and they're using a different version control. And in the second group, maybe IT bought an ITSM tool, a bunch of years ago before Jira Service Management became mainstream. And so you're now looking at just a collection of tools that maybe you've integrated, maybe you haven't integrated. There are times in every organization's career life cycle where you take a step back and ask the question, are these tools working for you or are you working for them? And so the more you have different disparate tools that you're connecting, the more you're going to end up investing working for them and trying to get them to integrate. And what you're seeing now, particularly from the Atlassian tools and from companies like AppFire, is lots of different ways to integrate. There's lots of different options. There's a common set of user experience that you get out of these tools. And so when your organization's ready to do a little bit of a retrospective in terms of what tools you're using and what processes you're operating, then you can start asking those questions and being a little bit more open about what's available to you, knowing that you have options. You still have options to go the open DevOps route or to start centralizing on some of the tools. Steve, I want to end this around your last question, your one last question around you. Again, Jira, the hub of information, lots of these other tools that are connected to that pipeline. How should I think about orchestrating a workflow?
How orchestrating a workflow can you give me a little bit more there to answer that?
So I might be doing a release. I might be making sure that my tickets are updated with the latest information. What are some of the examples that people are actually instrumenting and making sure that Jira is the hub of that information?
Well, the one that comes obviously to mind, right, is those connections back between build and release, for example, being able to set those triggers to create webhooks and establish webhooks there to make sure that all the transitions are happening naturally. I think if anybody who's worn, the Scrum Master hat or as a product manager, what they need to have is real time, and they need to have confidence what they're seeing in Jira is a reflection of reality, and having those triggers in place and having those automations in place to make sure that happens. And as Rodney's mentioned, also being able to have conditional logic to check and see if an approval is necessary, and if not, fast forwarding, as we call it, from one transition, skipping one transition to another is absolutely huge. And being able to reduce that manual effort, which is not only takes additional time, but is often forgotten, and you start losing that that reflection of reality that you really need Jira to be, especially if you're using it for reporting.
Yeah, so Steve, I'm going to generalize two things that I think are the best practices around CICD integration. Again, there's a lot of tools that you're using, particularly on the dev test side of things, also on the operating side of things. There's points where there are frictions in your workflows, whether there are steps to do an approval or share information. Those are great places to make sure that the entire ecosystem around your deploy is getting the latest of information. And the best example to see this is you might have a product owner that wants to answer a simple question, right? Does the demo environment have the latest version of the feature that I want to go out and test and validate with end users? And that person may not have access to Jenkins or Bitbucket. That person may only be familiar with Confluence, or may be able to look at Jira at a release level, and being able to roll up that information around what was deployed to what environment would be very useful to them. So for those of you working with large numbers of people in this development, end-to-end development and operational cycle, there's lots of opportunities to make sure that people are informed on the status of releases. So that's my best practice to leave with you. Now we've talked. Go ahead.
I was going to say it boils things down for a lot of those audience members, those audience folks that you're talking about. I don't mean the audience here. I mean the folks that are looking at Jira. It boils it down to a green, yellow, red, which is all they need. Right? They can go straight to the Jira issue and they can see exactly where that is and where it's been deployed.
So that's a good segue, right? The ecosystem of everybody who's involved with the Atlassian workflow, the entire development, test, operational workflows, and the request of can I get some top-down information, some KPIs, some basic understanding of where things are and what the statuses are. So AppFire owns one of my favorite plugins, the AIO Reports, which teams use to connect Jira directly to Tableau and Power BI. What are some of the examples of people using these tools to do more advanced reporting? What are you seeing, Steve?
Well, for AIO Reports, and again, this is use cases that I'm bringing back from my pre-AppFire days, which is really cool to see us acquiring Botron and acquiring AIO Reports. These are products that I not only use but recommended when I had my consulting hat on. And the obvious one that really jumps out is how many people are using Jira for their time reporting, but it doesn't have a really good time reporting interface. So they'll add tempo and things like that, but they need to be able to produce documentation for that. So the one that screams AIO Reports for that use case is, of course, time tracking and time reporting. Some great out-of-the-box capabilities there. It's built to integrate with Jira, so it knows exactly what fields you're trying to pull in, and it's just super easy to use.
Thanks, Steve. That's perfect. And Rodney, what are you seeing on the sort of DevOps ITSM side?
So, I mean, just from the general reporting side, right, we see people basically extending out to where either they're going to do stuff in Easy BI if they're internal, or they're going to be, popping out into Power BI or a Tableau on the back end. But like, on the ITSM side, what we're really seeing people looking for is, okay, for our service level metrics and the different types of things we're coming in, incidents versus problems versus service requests versus regular change requests, are we hitting, where are we hitting things? Are our SLAs our SROs, are they too wide? Are they too narrow? So, and that's what we see usually whenever people start using the tooling, is they spend like that first 6 months, first year, using those to narrow down and kind of tweak what those objectives are. But then, as part of that too, they're actually pulling things, going, okay, when stuff goes down, how long is it taking to get back up? Not just specifically from your service level objective side, but actually, looking at actually what's going on with the ticket, with the work that's done. And also, like, if you've got Ops Genie hooked in, right, you're watching on that side.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot more activity that happens in Ops Genie than on kind of on the Jira side when an incident or something is happening. So you're starting to see more reports of those bubble up that's being factored into, hey, is our ITS organization actually working properly right now? Are we meeting what we think we're meeting? And okay, where do we need to shore things up? Or hey, where are we doing great, and we can take that as the building point. So, kind of we're seeing that gathering of these base level timing metrics to compare and to see, are things happening the way we think they should be happening for us as an ITSM organization? And then, one of the things that we're starting to see come out, and it's in Jira Cloud right now, but and the naming on this, don't get it confused, because if you do a search, there's Insight, which is asset management, which is not what I'm talking about right now, but there's also the concept of insights. And those are kind of, the reports and things we've had inside of Jira. These are actually like a smaller sub panel that you'll see that'll bubble up things kind of quicker, depending on if you're looking at a DevOps project. Okay, you're going to see some release information and some graphs and some things in there. If you're working in a Scrum project, you're going to, I'm in a sprint and I can see what my issue breakdown is for it and stuff on the side without having to go into formal reports. So that's the other thing. We're actually starting to see, some of those things come across all areas of Jira. As far as, people are looking at the screen and they're using it as their source of information. Okay, I'm working on a ticket. Oh, I can glance to the side over here and bam, here's a graphical representation of a bunch of different sets of data that really ends up being kind of common for what we're looking at as an organization, without me having to drill into a report, right? You want those reports? Yes. You go into your Tableau and you go, okay, let's slice and dice this data that we pulled in and let's do some magic here. But this gives you kind of that working level in the moment views.
That's great, Rodney. I want to remind everybody that, we got some experts here around Agile, around DevOps and ITSM, and using the Atlassian Cloud as a way to be the hub of information that's happening across development through operations. So please, we're coming toward the end of our presentation, and we're hoping you're going to answer some questions. I do want to share with you some of my best practices around being able to use Tableau in particular as a tool for doing some top-down reports. What I find, Jira is really good at giving teams the information they require to understand how their backlogs are performing, how they're marching toward a release and all the burn downs. But as soon as you start getting into top-down level of reporting, so looking at multiple projects or looking at information from multiple tools in the ecosystem, that's when you want to start using tools like a Tableau or a Power BI and being able to look top-down into that information. So perhaps an executive looking at how teams are performing. If you have a PMO or project management office, they might be looking at trying to forecast the roadmap based on estimates the team is doing. A lot of organizations want to get into capacity planning, particularly when there's specific skill sets tied to the team. And, do you need additional SREs or do you need additional developers? And that data is buried in the commitments and the issues that people are taking on a sprint to sprint. Some want to look at backlog diagnostics. Do we have enough stories to fill a new team, and we should split a team in twos to be able to handle something like that. And then, of course, KPIs, looking at metrics across multiple teams and seeing what they are, how well different teams are performing, and finding ways to improve that. So I want to share a couple of examples from the StarCIO team. What you're seeing here is our backlog, the StarCIO backlog. We have a number of different businesses, and I like looking at things that you typically see in Jira software, things like versions, and where we are hitting our milestones. We use epics for different types of work that we're doing. We use sprints. We commit every week to a sprint's worth amount of work. And what I like to do is to drill down into this information, particularly into the media areas of this information. This is the work that I personally do, writing and speaking. And what you're seeing here is I've clicked into the epics for writing, speaking, prep work, all this work that I do, and I could see what my historic velocity has been in completing that work, and give me a forecast and an understanding of how much more work, how much more writing I can take on, or how much more speaking I can take on going into the forward sprint. So this is just an example of the different types of reporting that you can do. And again, it really plays into what happens when you need more top-down level reporting, when you want to slice and dice the data, as Rodney had pointed out. And then also what Steve pointed out, looking at things for data that's for other groups that might not be users, groups like finance that are going to look at data around time tracking, and then also looking at data coming in from across the ecosystem to understand better metrics. So, looking at Opsgenie and other data that might be coming into your Jira hub. So I do have a closing question for you guys, and then we're going to open up to see what questions are coming from the group. We've covered some best practices on automation, CICD, and dashboard. I just want to know what some of your other recommendations. Again, now what? We've moved to the cloud. We've got some teams running on Jira tools. We're doing some things in Agile DevOps and ITSM on the Atlassian Cloud. Steve, what are some other things that come to your mind in terms of how teams can move their organization forward, and now that they have a baseline set of tools to work with?
Well, there's a couple of apps that really come to mind that we've recently put out, one that's coming very soon, that's very highly anticipated. The first is our cloud version of our wildly popular SQL for Confluence. So we've just recently in Q1 released the SQL for Confluence app there that there's a lot of, as some people may know, there's a lot of challenges in being able to present data connectors in the cloud to your backend, some security, some stability. We've really solved for that, and we provided a really solid 1.0 version of that. We're currently continually to enhance that. So that's really exciting, particularly for reporting in line in your Confluence instance, for example. The second one, and I think is most germane to this webinar, is as you mentioned, we recently acquired Botron, the makers of Configuration Manager for Jira. It's used in a lot of use cases in the server and data center. A lot of people are familiar with that for handling migrations, for handling federation, staging, and promoting from stage, for example, in a lot of enterprise scenarios. Very wildly popular in that regard. But CMJ for Cloud is scheduled to come out in Q3, which I think one of the things most people are excited about is a lot of these. There's particularly when you're dealing with enterprise movement from a server to cloud, or in the case of multiple cloud instances, merging different multiple cloud instances, merging heterogeneous cloud and server example, and getting those into one. There's a lot of challenges that go along with that, particularly when you add add-ons or apps into that equation. And CMJ for Cloud is going to bring that solid reputation that it brought from the server and data center world into the cloud to help cover a lot of those. Particularly see that being used a lot by consulting partners that handle a lot of migrations.
Yeah, I think that point that this is when I heard that CMJ was going to be coming out for cloud, that's probably one of the add-ons that I want the most this year. Right? We've used this in the past. If you've done any Jira admin work where you've had to have somebody work on a workflow and you go, okay, you need to work on this in staging. Okay, now how do we get it in production? Well, you can hand do it, or you use CMJ to push. It's one of those that finds its way into workflows from that perspective for migrations. And this is, on the server and data center versions, we've been using that for years as one of the tools that we keep in our pocket. And, I know a lot of other enterprise organizations, same thing, right? Even after you make migrations, it ends up being a tool that just stays there because of that ability to up and downshift projects between tiers, which really you need if you want to not break your production environment. And like I said, this is one of those that's really exciting from my perspective too. Like if you're doing a cloud to cloud migration as one of the really good key cases, because right now cloud to cloud, if you want to do that, at least on one of those instances, you're going to have to migrate everything down out of cloud, put it on an on-prem instance, and then use JCMA or something to move it back up. And there's a lot of steps in that process, and the more steps you have in a process, the more fragile something can be, the more potential issues you introduce into the system. Being able to go cloud to cloud without that step, it'll make those migrations faster and cleaner. But like I said, it's not something that ends at, oh, we're migrated, so now we don't need the license anymore, we don't need the tool anymore. No, because for a good mature organization, you're not going to want to be testing out your configuration changes in your production environment. You're going to want to test them in a stage environment first, and then promote them. Or if you run into, even if you have bugs, you may want to go ahead and, instead of replicating your whole instance, you want to pull down a project, because we know this project is busted. Pull it down to another server without having to go through the whole process of replicating your entire site, which, especially at the enterprise level, can really be time consuming, when you get into the hundreds of thousands or a million plus issue count.
Ronnie, I love
maybe
this.
I'm a little excited for that tool. So
no, I'm excited too, because you think about the early days of cloud and SaaS, and it forced people to do things in production they didn't want to, and that slowed your process down. So what you're telling me is I can pull a project down, make a template, create a workflow out of it, push data down to a separate environment to validate it. Meanwhile, everybody's still working as is. And then when I'm sure it's working, then I can automate its push up. And then when my company acquires another company and they have a separate cloud instance, I have Atlassian as a platform to bring everybody in together. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah. Or you find that, Bob in accounting used his credit card to spin up a cloud instance, and, oh, wait a second, now we've got a business critical project on here that needs to make it into the whole instance.
Yeah,
okay,
somehow I don't know Bob in accounting is spinning up.
Oh, it happens. It's the cloud version of the server under the desk.
Under the desk. That's precisely what I was going to say. Yeah, it's the cloud version of the server under the desk scenario. Yep.
It still happens, believe it or not. Ronnie, before we take some questions, I want to give you the last word on this. You help a lot of clients move to the Atlassian Cloud. What are some of the next steps that ISOS helps them with?
So the way I like to think of this, right, is, okay, you've bought a house, you can't, you don't want to furnish it with lawn furniture, right? So, and that's where you want us, where ISOS will go and will help start you on, getting some of those automations set up inside of there, so that you get some of that benefit that we talked about earlier, making sure, like if you got JMW or JSU or any of the other, AppFire plugins or any other third-party apps in there, let's start to leverage the real functionality of those to kick your cloud environment up into high gear. So that's, one of the things is, going and working with the teams that have moved to now start to really tune those tools so they work for their organization, right? Get some standardization, get some governance across, build up those organizational toolboxes. And one of the other things that we start to see too is, is now having people look at the level above just the project level. So, you're on Jira Cloud Premium. So now let's go ahead and get that advanced roadmaps in there to go our cross project view, so that we're looking more organizationally at things as opposed to discrete units. So, it's kind of helping with those is what we look at after, like, post migration, right? Getting the migration is, you just bought the house, you got the keys to it. We got to buy the furniture. We got to get everything set up now.
I love that, Rodney. It's just a really great analogy. Before we get into a Q&A, I want to leave with you some of the best practices that we talked about. So number one, really look to using these tools and now processes to start transforming IT. So not just looking at Agile and DevOps and ITSM as separate different units of IT, start bringing them together as one end-to-end workflow. And it really goes in both directions, from dev moving things out into production, but also feedback from production back into dev. Then using Jira as the centralization of all your workflows. And we talked about how CICD has all these different tools that live off of that. It's time to bring that information into one warehouse and be able to share that information with different parties who are maybe doing elements of the development process, but not directly involved in all of them, or have access to all of those different tools. And probably the best expression of that is when we start using tools like AIO Reports to bring data into a Power BI or a Tableau. And now we can present KPIs back to management. We can present top-down diagnostic reports so we can do some forecasting. And now we can really start becoming a smart organization in terms of how we're operating. So we're going to go, so one last message, we do have some more information to find about these different best practices. ISOS has 2 white papers that I hope you will download and look at. How to get the most value from your Atlassian investment. That's coming from isostech.com/Atlassian-investment. And then the other one, 7 key decisions to make about your apps. And that's coming from isostech.com/app-decision. So 2 really good white papers to help you follow up, plus the additional webinars that I mentioned earlier during the webinar today. So with that, I do have a couple of questions, and please use the question and answer group, part of the Zoom app if you have questions yourself. But I have a question here for Steve. AppFire is acquiring a lot of the top apps in the Atlassian marketplace. How do you talk about the roadmap and how you're going to maintain all these different apps? You mentioned just like 3 or 4 different automation apps. What's AppFire's position around that? You're on mute, Steve.
Thanks. Well, so I was going to say, well, of course, we're not sharing any information about as far as a roadmap for acquisitions per se, but like as far as the apps that we've acquired, we have an open Jira instance, Jira Service Desk instance, for example, for any issues that we're currently tracking. I'm not aware of any plan to open that roadmap per se in now or in the near future. But yeah, I'm just not sure if that's on the horizon yet.
Okay, and in terms of your strategy about having multiple apps in a single category, how do you see that?
Well, the idea behind that, right, is that we use kind of a toothpaste analogy to describe it. Everyone has different needs. Everyone needs toothpaste, but some people want whitening, some people want this. So people have different focused needs, and JSU and JMWE, for example, you can look at those as competitors, but you can also look at those as options to be able to really define who the audience of users are for those apps. What are they really needing? What are they really going after? Which, as I mentioned before, in the example of evaluation. So you bring them both up. And you end up going with one over the other. I mean, Rodney mentioned a lot of enterprise have both. Why is that? Why did you choose this one over this one? Does that define you as a particular type of user, a particular category of user versus someone who went with JSU, for example? And why did they choose that over? And being able to tune those products, not just with feature, but with user experience as well. To go after specific needs that we've identified as being, either high growth or high need.
Yeah, I like that answer, Steve. My analogy is that, you carry a bunch of tools in your toolkit, different size hammers, different size screwdrivers, and so forth, and you're going to put the right tool to the job. And that's what I'm hearing out of this, lots of opportunities around automation and being able to do some experiment, understand the experience of one tool versus another, and seeing which is the right one to fit the job. So I think that makes total sense. There's another question here also on automations, and I think we'll throw this one at Rodney. since you work with a lot of different organizations, how do organizations staff to handle the different types of implementations? Who's doing them? What's the skill set involved with them? So now that I'm on the cloud, how are these actually getting done in practice?
So, one of the ways to get them done, is you have a partner help, and you can actually do like knowledge transfer, train the trainer kind of thing. So you're going through, you tackle some of the more complex automations, you show them how to do those. And usually then organizations will have somebody shadow you on those. And that a lot of times, they're ones who get excited about, getting into the nuts and bolts. Or you just stay. If that's not something you wanted to do, then you just stay with like a managed services or something longer, where okay, we have automations, we have somebody external that's actually going to be handling this for us. And the automations in Jira are something that's they can be complex, but they're learnable, and that's really where we see a lot of it is, we build these out, but there are some people in the organizations that are zealots, and it's kind of that mixing of them learning best practices, like from an ISO, or basically from whoever's helping, and tackling those more complex cases with them so that they can develop some of that knowledge to do at least some of the normal cases themselves.
Yeah, so I like that sort of three-prong answer. You can go, test things yourselves. You can work with a partner to get some examples, work with ISOs to get some working examples of moving data between, let's just say, Jira Service Manager and Jira software. And then you can even use you as a service provider, a managed service provider, and use you guys as a way of developing automations on request. So a lot of different options there for being able to bring out automations into your organization. So again, thank you today for joining us. We're coming up to the end of our hour. Thank you for sticking with us, and I hope you found a lot of value in different ways you can continue to invest in your Atlassian tools, in your automations, in using these tools to accelerate your Agile DevOps, IT service management practices, and bringing it into an end-to-end ecosystem. I'm Isaac Sokolic. I'm the president of StarCIO. I want to thank all of you for sticking around. Thank my two guests, Stephen Kling from AppFire and Rodney West from ISOS Technology, and have a great day, and look forward to seeing you on the next webinars, and look for the email from ISOS in terms of some of the follow-up web URLs to the white papers and webinars that I mentioned today. Have a great day.